Dear Theo, pardon me for just showing up like this. I'll be at the Louvre at noon, or earlier if you wish. Vincent van Gogh arrives in Paris in late February 1886. He moves in with his brother Theo on the Rue Le Pic. Having lived and worked in the Netherlands and Belgium for 6 years, Vincent's 2-year stay in Paris was of great influence on the development of his work as a painter.
Vincent van Gogh is the prototypical artist, living entirely for his art. Each year, 1.3 million people from all over the world visit the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam to enjoy his paintings. This museum manages the largest single collection of his work, and that can be quite a challenge. The Van Gogh Museum and Shell have been collaborating for several years now in the technical scientific research of the paintings.
The main reasons why we are doing this kind of research is to gain information about the technical matters concerning Van Gogh's works, the paintings and the drawings. Technical research because we have to know how Van Gogh worked and how we should see the order, for example, of his works. How should we date which work? But the technical research is also very important for the restorer, who has to know how to work, what to do, what not to do is very important. We have to gain insights in Van Gogh's, how he built up his way of working, what he kept and what he threw away, as it were, in technical matters. And in the end, it's also very important to establish insights because of attribution problems. What is by Van Gogh and what is not by Van Gogh, not necessarily fakes, but also things that were wrongly attributed to him.
In Paris, Vincent came into contact with other painters in Fernand Cormon's studio, and via the contacts of his brother Theo, who was a prominent art dealer. He meets the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. Their work inspired him, and he changed his palette. The dark, earthy colors disappeared, making place for a more richly colored palette.
Oil painting on canvas is often the description on the label beside a painting. But is it really that simple? If we examine a painting one layer at a time, we often first encounter a coat of varnish. The varnish was usually applied later as a protective layer for the painting. The following layers usually consist of the pigments, the actual layer of paint. If we look under the paint layer, we sometimes find a drawing underneath, made with pencil, chalk or charcoal. Sometimes Vincent wanted to create a specific atmosphere. He would then apply a single layer of color as a foundation. A first coat of pale colored paint forms the foundation for the whole painting. This first coat of paint is applied to the material, usually a linen canvas mounted on a wooden frame. Paintings are actually extremely vulnerable objects. The influence of light, air, temperature and humidity causes aging and loss of quality. This process can be delayed by applying a protective coat of varnish. But the varnish turns yellow with the passing of years. Due to this, one ends up viewing the painting as through yellow glasses. In order to reveal the original colors once again, the old coat of varnish is removed and, if necessary, replaced by a new one.
We use several techniques to gain more insight in the work of Van Gogh. To start with several photographic techniques. X-ray is being used, which gives us the chance to look under the paint, see what might be hidden there. We use ultraviolet, we use infrared, but also a more refined infrared technique, which is called infrared reflectography. And this enables you to look under the paint, as it were, and see if there is an underdrawing that Van Gogh made, and if we see his perspective frame, for example. Very important are microscopical techniques that we use, the normal stereo microscope, but also the electron microscope, which uses scanning techniques that give enormous magnification of the samples, and also exact ideas about what they contain. The samples are very, very tiny, but with the electron microscope, they of course are enormous.
Vincent painted many still lifes while living in Paris. He considered these works studies, in which he experimented with contrasting colors. He would also use skins of colorful staples of wool to examine the effect and harmony of the colors.
Infrared reflectography is a technique that makes it possible to view drawings underneath the coats of paint. A light source is mounted in front of a painting. The invisible infrared rays penetrate the topmost coats of paint. They are reflected when they reach light areas and are absorbed by dark areas such as carbon. The reflection of the infrared rays is registered by a special infrared camera. The signal is then transferred into a black and white image on a computer screen. This makes the layer beneath the pigments visible.
Well, it's very exciting because it allows us to see early stages in the painting process, so we can understand how Van Gogh made his pictures. And one of the very surprising things is that we think of him as being a very spontaneous painter that painted very quickly, setting down his brushstrokes in one go. But quite often it turns out that, in fact, he started with a rather detailed sketch of his motif, using pencil or charcoal on the prime support.
Paintings wilt like flowers. All the colors that were made fashionable by Impressionism will change, which is all the more reason to apply them too brightly. They will, after all, fade with time anyway. In Paris, Van Gogh purchased his paint from small traditional shops. Julien Tanguy, whom the painters called Père Tanguy, was one of his suppliers. Tanguy had turned a back room of his house into a gallery. That is where Van Gogh met his contemporaries Paul Gauguin and Émile Bernard.
At the end of the 19th century, new factory-made lacquer paints first appeared. The paint quality, however, left much to be desired. Van Gogh already experienced the changing of colors by the effects of sunlight during his own lifetime. Red, for instance, became brownish, or even started to fade. Only around the edges of a painting, beneath the frame, are the original paint colors still to be found. The degradation process depends on the quality of the paint that was used. We want to find out through research how that paint was produced, so that this degradation process can be slowed down. In order to make this research into the chemical composition of this paint possible, minute paint samples are extracted from the painting. The samples are sent to the ICN, the Institute collection of the Netherlands. They are then examined by microscope and prepared for further research. The paint sample is then embedded in a cube of synthetic resin. The Shell Research and Technology Center in Amsterdam has a lot of knowledge and expertise in the field of electron microscopy. That knowledge is used to obtain information on the composition of the paint Van Gogh used for his paintings. Using a scanning electron microscope, a sample can be magnified many thousands of times, allowing researchers to determine what elements make up the paint. The sample is put under the microscope and is irradiated with high-energy electrons.
Alsjeblieft. Ja, wat zie je? Zoiets. En dan zetten we dat daar neer. En hier zit dus ook de zwavel van...
On a computer screen, the structure and composition of the pigment grains become visible. In other words, what chemicals are in the paint and in what amounts.
Lood zie ik. Die daar is, dit is zink, denk ik.
Oké. Maar dit is het barium.
Dat is barium, ja.
Well, the work is essential to the conservator who's faced with the care of a collection in order to be able to understand which materials have been used and how the paintings age. And based on that information, we can decide whether or not to treat paintings, what are the best circumstances to preserve them, and if we do treat them, which are the safe and the best materials and methods to use.
The research also provides other insights. By comparing the results from different samples with each other, the creation date of paintings can be determined more accurately, for instance. Paintings can also be attributed to their creator with more certainty. Is it a real Van Gogh?
Van Gogh learnt a lot during his time in Paris. He studied the technique of pointillism intensively, applying it based on his own judgment. His colours became clearer and brighter, and his brushstroke transformed into a swift stroke of short lines. The variation in brushstrokes, which makes a painting more dynamic, was Van Gogh's contribution to the new way of painting.
What is the significance of scientific research into art objects? Research delivers essential information about an artist's work and methods.
Obviously, here at the Van Gogh Museum, we have a lot of expertise on the artist himself, on his life, on his career as a painter. But Shell contributes an enormous amount of expertise in terms of technical research. Technical research is really important for us because it helps us understand really Van Gogh's painting techniques, the way he worked, how he made up his paint, as it were, how he constructed his paintings. And that is really important to know so that we can better understand why the paintings look the way they look today and also what state they're in.
We now have a much better idea of how Van Gogh created his paintings and how he employed his techniques and his palette. But we also have learned how to treat his paintings in order to resist decay and to prolong their existence.
This big research project will continue on, and ultimately we are hoping that the project will lead to an extensive publication as well as a large exhibition that will illustrate not only Van Gogh's paintings and his techniques, the way they were produced, but also some of those of his contemporaries.
In 1888, Van Gogh bade Paris farewell. The artist moved on into France, towards Arles, close to the Mediterranean. In the spring, perhaps in February or even sooner, I I might go to the south of France, the land of blues and cheerful colours.